Hello, and welcome to Encounters with Polish Literature, brought to you by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. I'm David Goldfarb, and I'll be your host. I'm on the road yet again, recording my introduction to today's episode, this time from New York City, and you'll hear the sounds of the city around us, where I completed my doctorate in comparative literature at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, taught at Barnard College, and worked at the Polish Cultural Institute, New York, as curator of literature and humanities. Today, we have the second episode in a series featuring contemporary poets, generally a generation, two, maybe even three, after the generation of 68 that included Adam Zagajewski and Stanisław Barańczak. If you haven't seen the first episode in the series, go back to Season 4, Episode 12, when we had Krystyna Dąbrowska and Tomasz Różycki on the program. Today, our guests are Julia Fiedorczuk and Tadeusz Dąbrowski. Julia Fiedorczuk is a writer, poet, translator, and professor at Warsaw University, where she helped to create a Center for Environmental Humanities. Her work explores the relationship between human beings and their planetary environments and emphasizes the world-making power of literature. She has authored short story collections and novels, including Pod Słońcem, Under the Sun, and Dom Oriona, The House of Orion, as well as 6 poetry volumes, the most recent of which is Glyph, so far just in Polish, published in 2024. She has also published essays, including A Cyborg in the Garden, Introduction to Eco-Criticism, that's in Polish. She was nominated for the Nike Prize, Poland's highest literary award in 2016, and twice for the Julian Tuwim Lifetime Achievement Award. She is 2018 laureate of the Szymborska Prize for her Psalms, and Oxygen, a volume of her selected poems translated by Bill Johnston, was longlisted for the National Translation Award in the USA in 2016. Her work has been translated into over 20 languages, including books in English, German, Spanish, Swedish, Serbian, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Chinese, and Georgian. She is a columnist for Polityka, a popular Polish weekly, and a frequent guest on Polish radio for shows about poetry. Tadeusz Dąbrowski, born in 1979, is a poet, essayist, and critic. He is editor-in-chief of the literary bimonthly Topos and the artistic director of the European Poet of Freedom Festival. He has been published in many journals in Poland and abroad, The New Yorker, Boston Review, Agni, American Poetry Review, and many others. Too many to name right here. He is the author of 6 volumes of poetry, Wypieki in 1999, Email, 2000, Mazurek in 2002, Te Deum in 2004 and again in 2008, Czarny Kwadrat in 2009, and Pomiędzy in 2013. He has won numerous awards, including the Horst Binek Prize in 2014, the Kościelski Prize in 2009, the Hubert Burda Prize in 2008, and from Tadeusz Różewicz himself, the Prize of the Foundation for Polish Culture in 2006. He was nominated for the Nike Prize himself in 2010. His work has been translated also into 20 languages, including English, German, Estonian, Czech, Ukrainian, and many others. He lives in Gdańsk on the Baltic coast of Poland. Let's go to the discussion that we recorded a few weeks ago. Julia and Tadeusz, welcome to Encounters with Polish Literature.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to have you on the program. So why don't you start by introducing yourselves to our audience? Each of you can, just tell us, where are you from and when did you start writing poetry? Julia, why don't you go first?
I live in Warsaw right now. So I'm in Warsaw right now in my apartment. I live here. I teach at Warsaw University. And I'm really quite attached to Warsaw, I have to say, at this stage of my life. But I grew up in a small village outside of Warsaw in the Mazovian region, so in central Poland, even though my family comes from eastern Poland, from Podlasie, so the region of the Białowieża forest. So I come from a mixed family, borderland region where there's a lot of, or traditionally, there used to be a lot of multiculturalism and all kinds of conflict that also caused. So that eastern part of Poland, which is now once again the site of massive political tensions, as we know. That's where I come from. So I have these two spaces. One of them is Warsaw, which is my hometown right now, and which is very important for me. I've lived here for 20 years now. The other one is Eastern Poland, close to the border with Belarus, where my family comes from, and that's another homeland, a very complicated one, but one that I've been going back to more and more frequently in my recent writings.
You teach in the English department, if I'm not mistaken, American Studies?
Yes, I teach in the English department. I teach American Studies. I teach mostly American poetry, contemporary American poetry, but I have been interested in environmental humanities for quite a while. So recently, most of my classes also have to do with eco-criticism, eco-poetics, and more broadly, environmental humanities. So there's this aspiration to try to bring humanities together with other scientific disciplines, including biological sciences. That's one of the projects that we have had at the Modern Languages Department, which is called the Eco Lab. If you want, I can talk about this a bit later.
Tadeusz, tell us a little about yourself. You're in Gdańsk, right?
I do live in Gdańsk. I'm 45, I guess. I'm the author of 10 volumes of poetry, one big book of essays on poetry, and a novel about a love story based in New York City, which hasn't been translated yet. I don't know why into English. And I also teach since 3 years at the University of Gdańsk, because there is a new creative writing course or program, and I'm a part of it, and I teach poetry. So I do something impossible, but I'm doing my best to teach how to read and how to write poetry, or how to not write poetry, because I'm pretty not sure if it's possible to learn to teach someone writing poems. I grew up in a little town 1 hour away from Gdańsk. It's called Pasłęk. But since over 20 years, I live here in Three City. We call it Three City because it is a pretty big city agglomeration, connecting three totally different, the atmosphere of the city. Three cities, Gdańsk, Sopot, and Gdynia, altogether it is about 1 million people. So I live here, I work here, I have 2 little kids at home, so it's not easy to be a guy in my 30s and to have 2 little kids. It's on 40 square meters. We have a very small apartment, so it's the first time in my life when I really enjoy my office and when I really take rest going to work. And so what can I say? My father was a doctor. He passed away 5 years ago, and my mother is a dancer. She's in her 70s, but she was dancer in the Gdańsk theater. So that's kind of a very inspiring mixture: a doctor and an artist, a stage artist.
I think a lot of Americans, they know, sort of the big names of mid-century Polish poetry, mid-20th century Polish poetry. They know, Herbert and Szymborska and Miłosz and Różewicz, and they know at least one poem by Adam Zagajewski that was published in the New Yorker after 9/11. But they're not so familiar with contemporary poetry, and maybe that's maybe it's because poetry. Do you think poetry is as vital in Poland as it once was? Or has it become like in every country where you don't have manifesti and you don't have, regional groupings as much.
If you mean mass audiences, then no, it's not vital. But I wonder if poetry has ever had, a mass audience. I think that poetry is doing actually quite well in Poland. There are a lot of younger poets who are exploring new poetics, new kinds of poetics, new ways of writing. There are groupings of poets in individual cities, maybe around certain cultural phenomena such as festivals or literary journals. So there are quite a lot of interesting younger voices that I read. I don't always connect to all of them, which I think is absolutely okay. Because I strongly believe in the value of diversity when it comes to poetics. I really think that it's wonderful when people have all kinds of ways of addressing this relationship between language and reality, language and politics, and I kind of enjoy that. And there are some poets that I like more, some that I like less, some that I don't get, but I think it's okay. I think it's okay that not everybody gets my poetry. I wouldn't want for my poetry to have this universal appeal, because it would be at odds with what I believe about the diversity of the imagination, the diversity of the voices. So it depends on what you mean by vital. I think in many ways it is vital because there's vital new work that's getting written. It's of course niche, right? It exists in a kind of niche, but I also think it's okay. I think that part of the power of poetry has to do with the fact that it is a niche, and because paradoxically this is what makes poetry freer as a cultural practice that is very difficult to capitalize on. It's very difficult to commodify poetry just because nobody will pay for it. So, of course, we suffer, right? Because nobody wants to pay us for our work. But on the other hand, and I'd like to be paid more. But on the other hand, that also gives poetry a kind of freedom, yes? Because few people care enough to pay for it, which means that you can basically do what you want. And I think that doing what you want at this time, of tensions, of social media, the commodification of attention, the standardization of human communication, I think it's very valuable. This kind of the ability to fool around and play and open up new spaces. So in this sense, I believe it's vital. And also, it's the last thing which I'm going to say. Surprisingly, I think that there's more space for poetry. I don't know if Tadeusz would agree with me on this last one, but that there seems to be more openness to poetry and more space to poetry, for example, in the mass media. Well, if we have such a thing as mass media, in the media, let's say, than 5 years ago. Like, for example, I am regularly invited to the Polish radio called Talk FM, which is a very popular radio station that basically tackles politics and social issues. It's a talking radio. And so I'm regularly invited there to talk about poetry for 40 minutes. And it airs at like 10 a.m. on Friday. So this is something that would not have happened a decade ago.
Not having censorship to, fight against. You're like resisting other things, like Julia says, commodification and so forth. But what do you think, Tadeusz?
I think that 25 years ago, when I made my debut, those days there was much more space for poetry in the big medias. Okay. For example, in the second channel of the Polish national television, you can find poets, you can find poetry. Now it's almost impossible, but I think that the main problem is that the ethos of poetry has finally died a few years ago. What I mean. What I mean talking about ethos. The Polish literature or poetry tradition is mostly based on romanticism, on romantic poetry. And in romantic poetry, in Poland and in Germany too, poet was someone comparable with a prophet. That was a guide. That was someone that was authority. People listened to the poet's voice, and people were asking poets for some advice. So poets was someone important. And even in communistic times, we still had a kind of transformed ethos of romantic poets. So the musicians and the bards, singing poets like Jacek Kaczmarski, they could sell like 2,000-3,000 tickets for the concerts. So the position of the poet as a social figure was still very, very important. But in early capitalism in 90s in Poland, everything has changed. So the poet is no more someone important in a social sense. And I'm afraid that this ethos has not been replaced with snobism yet. What we can see in the United States, almost every college, almost every university have its creative writing program. Yeah, in Poland, okay, at some universities it has started 2 years ago. In Gdańsk 3 years ago, but still we haven't replaced this diet ethos of a poet with snobism for poetry, of reading poetry. In every bigger weekly paper in the US, you have the poem or two poems, which means that in American minds, poetry is an immanent part of culture. So there is no culture without poetry, and in Poland,
I think you're more optimistic than I am.
Yeah, but in Poland you can't find. Okay, sometimes in Gazeta Wyborcza, it's those days it was very popular and influential daily newspaper. There you can find one time a week or a poem, but usually it's not. It is not so cool, fancy to write and to read poetry in Poland as in the US. I think within 20 years we got twice Nobel Prize for the Gone to Poets, to Wisława Szymborska and Czesław Miłosz. But it doesn't reflect in the social need, hunger for poetry. So if you would ask someone on the street, is poetry essential for you to live? He would answer, yes, of course, poetry is very important. But asking someone, what did you read? What have you read last time? Give me a title. Tell me, what poet do you like? That would be very problematic. I'm afraid you wouldn't get such an answer. So that's the problem. If we be able to create this kind of trend of reading poetry, because to refresh this poetry ethos from the past, I'm afraid it's impossible anymore.
We do have poetry in the New Yorker and in the Atlantic and in the New York Review of Books, but even these are kind of niche. But on the other hand, that's the part of American culture that you know, and I know like the part of Polish culture that includes people like you and Yulia.
Yeah, but for some reason the editors haven't decided to sell the page for advertisement for the big companies, but they still want to fill it with poetry, and that's beautiful.
Julia, why don't you read first?
Stan 31. Sikorka przysiadła na parapecie, jak wiadomość wygenerowana przez mgłę. Październik przechodził w listopad, w brzozach, dębach, olchach, mrozoodpornych kwiatach na cmentarzach, gdzie nasi ojcowie nie pisali pamiętników, gdzie nie poznaliby naszych dzieci, naszych wierszy i nas. Telewizja nadawała Polskę, która zginęła, a potem nie zginęła, a potem znowu zginęła, a potem nie, a potem słońce podbiło wycinankę gałęzi, nie wiadomo kiedy sikorka wsiąkła w niebo, zanim zdążyłam powiedzieć: pamiętaj, zapamiętaj mnie.
Psalm 31 for RK. A chickadee had perched on the windowsill like a message, generated by the mist. October was turning into November in the birches, oaks, alders, in the frost-resistant flowers, in the cemeteries where our fathers wrote no memoirs, where they would not recognize our children, our poems, ourselves. The television was showing Poland that had perished, and then that had not perished, and then again had perished, and then not. And then the sun flung up a mesh of branches. All at once, the chickadee was absorbed by the sky before I could say, remember, remember me. You know, one thing that I like that I've seen a number of, of your poems is that you kind of relish in this kind of contradiction, the country that perished and then didn't perish and then perished and then didn't perish again. And you have another poem where you talk about, the child that is mine and that is not mine. And that seems to be a recurring kind of rhetorical device that you use.
Maybe in the Psalms, the aspiration or the impulse is to try to avoid closure. I'm afraid of closure.
Mm-hmm.
I think, the kind of ethos that I would subscribe to is not so much the prophet ethos, but the ethos of someone who makes things less obvious rather than giving answers. And so for me, this, especially in Psalms, which often end in a colon or with a dash, this idea of avoiding closure, of leaving things hanging, simply because I think we have no answers. And when it comes to the the whole project of Psalms becomes a kind of chronicle of a very turbulent moment. Actually, I started writing Psalms around 2012. So it was the moment when I was paying attention to the migration crisis on the Mediterranean Sea. So this was the first summer, somehow, for some reason, that it really got to me, that I understood that people were actually dying on the boats trying to come to Europe. And I felt somehow that that's the beginning of, that is the beginning of some new stage in European history that is going to be super tense and painful. And so I have been paying attention to that, to the migration crisis since then. And it's a big topic in Psalms. Also now, as the viewers maybe know, we have this humanitarian crisis on the eastern border, on the border with Belarus, which is part of the so-called hybrid war, where people are used, people who want to get into Europe are used cynically, yes, for political reasons to try to destabilize the border. So we understand security issues and all that, but on the other end of that are people who just end up, in the forest, lost and completely helpless. So it's a theme that runs through the Psalms. That's one thing. Another thing is climate collapse, and the devastation of the biosphere. So it's a topic that nobody wants to think about right now because, we have these more immediate worries, such as our immediate security. So we think, okay, we can forget about the environmental destruction.
Drones.
But but it's ongoing. It's also happening in Ukraine. I have traveled to Ukraine twice in last year. The last time in May, and because I co-organized an eco-critical event actually in Ukraine. So Ukrainian eco-criticism is very strong, and they are aware of the fact that the war that's ongoing is also a war against the environment. That it's it's an aspect of the destruction that's happening. So what I'm trying to say is that in this really complex situation with multiple crises and multiple tensions, I think the temptation of conclusions is very powerful, and I resist that temptation. I try to kind of, like, for me, poetry is an attempt to resist those quick conclusions. Also, I think the culture of communication right now, and that's especially made really bad by the social media, is that people are supposed to have opinions about everything, and people are supposed to be experts on everything. And it's like, something happens and then everybody has an opinion 5 minutes later, and you have to kind of take up a position on something. It's like there's this demand that you, and so for me, poetry is the opposite of that. Is the openness. Is the chiaroscuro? That's such a word exists.
Yeah, chiaroscuro. Yeah, black and white. Yeah. And it's the
light and shadow. Yeah, light and shadow, and it's the nuance. Yes, it's the nuance. It's a space to breathe. It's a space to make mistakes also, and to be aware of the limitations of one's knowledge. Yes, when I know that I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I make mistakes. I'm wrong, but to know that I'm wrong makes it possible to empathize maybe in some fundamental way with people who are wrong in a different manner.
Tadeusz, could you read Wiersz bez tajemnicy, a poem without mystery?
Wiersz bez tajemnicy. Być sobie na Żuławach operatorem śluzy, na mało istotnym odcinku kanału, pośrodku płaskiego krajobrazu. Codziennie jeździć rowerem do betonowej budki, mniejszej niż kiosk ruchu. Obserwować przez kwadratowe okienko wschody i zachody słońca. Nie mieć pojęcia o sztuce. Wiedzieć, gdzie czają się szczupaki, a gdzie węgorze. Pewien mglisty poranek, popijając herbatę ze spirytusem, usłyszeć w radiu, które odbiera tylko jedną stację, że na świecie żyje ponad 10 milionów gatunków roślin i zwierząt i nie dać temu wiary, albo że są takie kraje, gdzie ludzie umierają z głodu, i zamyślić się nad tym, i zapomnieć spuścić śluzę, i zalać kilka pobliskich łąk i nie ponieść za to żadnych konsekwencji.
I remember when we were, when you visited the United States about, 12 years ago, and we were working to promote your work, that at that time you didn't have as much English, and I would always read the English poems. You called me your American voice, which was kind of amusing, but you didn't need me to be the American voice. I just happened to be there. Poem without mystery. Oh, to be a lock keeper in Żuławy, on a non-essential branch of the canal, amid a flat landscape, to ride a bike each day to a concrete cabin smaller than a news kiosk, to watch through a little square window the risings and settings of the sun, to have no knowledge of art, to know where the pike lurks, where the eels, on a misty morning drinking tea with a dash of spirit, to hear on the radio, which only gets one channel, that in the world there are over 10 million species of plants and animals, and not to believe it, or that there are countries where people are dying of hunger, and to think about it and forget to open the sluice and flood several nearby meadows and not bear any consequences for it. One thing that jumped out at me in that poem is that addresses the question of what is sometimes untranslatable, is that the lock keeper's place of work is kioskruch, or compared to kioskruch in the original poem, which of course no one will know what that means in English. So Antonia makes it into a news kiosk, which is the best possibility. But that was a very specific cultural icon, I thought, from the Polish People's Republic, from PRL, the communist Poland. And I think there's something of the consciousness of that era in that poem.
Yeah, we have the last one in my estate, which survived, but in fact there are almost no more news kiosks in Poland too. But it was an iconic place, everyday place to buy cigarettes and newspapers, and you had the news kiosk on every corner, everywhere. So yeah, it's pity that this part of culture disappeared. But
well,
yes.
Now it's an artifact.
But this news kiosk it's not the most important thing for this poem, I think.
Is this the area where you grew up? Is this Żuławy, around Żuławy?
Yeah,
okay.
almost every day I was going for fishing, to catch fish with my father, because my father was a doctor, but to take rest from the stress which the doctor's job brings. It was the flat Żuławian landscape, and almost every day, almost every afternoon, me and my father we were catching fish. So that's the landscape which really influenced my imagination, my sensibility, and in this poem I try to say that sometimes the most mysterious things are just in the front of our eyes, of our nose. So it's the mystery of the world is nothing. Sometimes it's nothing to be searched very, very deeply. Which sometimes the mystery is totally uncovered. We just have to be, to be sensible, and we need to look at it, to see it, to recognize it. And now reading this poem, I realize that totally unintentionally I wrote some perhaps eco-poetic poem, but it was perhaps 15 years ago when eco-poetic in Poland, perhaps it existed, but it was not very popular yet. Julia knows about it much more because it teaches.
I am in fact writing against eco-poetry, because eco-poetry seems to me to be a label that is that people place on certain poems to say, oh, this poem is ecological, and so another poem is not ecological. So I in what I wrote in the field of eco-poetics, I have always distanced myself from this notion of eco-poetry as a particular kind of poetry. It's never been my way of thinking about these things or writing about these things, never. But people, I guess, the definition of eco-poetry, which is mostly, I think, it mostly functions maybe in the Anglophone world, is that it's a poetry with a strong ecological message. Now, what is a strong ecological message, and what is the message in a poem? I mean, I find at least two problems with this definition. What counts in a poem as a strong ecological message? I am not particularly fond of writing poetry that contains a strong message at all, right? Because I'm worried that if poetry becomes is used in the service of, even a very good cause, it becomes, I think it loses its power, which comes from freedom. So, okay, so this is one side of this issue. The other side of the issue is that how can I, a poet, yes, someone who writes poetry, so someone who's really attentive to language, someone who pays attention to the sensuous experience, someone who is immersed in the world and who is somehow, in touch with the human, but also the more than human. How can I write outside of this massive crisis? I find it impossible to write outside of the catastrophe that's happening. And so the question for me is, this. The question that I ask, let's say, as someone who has been thinking about the so-called eco-poetics for some time, the question I have asked is this: how does contemporary poetry, how does it respond thematically, but also formally, for instance, to this transformation of the planet that's ongoing? Yes, to the fact that we're losing the wild, that we're losing biodiversity, that things are dying out at an unprecedented pace. Yes, that linguistic diversity is shrinking, which is connected to the loss of biodiversity, and so on and so forth. We could go on. This simply changes the environment of poetry, given the fact that traditionally European poetry has always thought about it's nothing new. European poetry has always considered the relationship between human beings and their environments, between the city and the wild, the city and the city and the pastoral setting. Let's say, when we're thinking about pastoralism in, say, Greek or Roman poetry. So there's nothing new when it comes to in this fact that poetry pays attention to the non-human world. Yes, that it pays attention to the material world. My own way of writing could be maybe I could be among the poets for whom this materiality of the world is especially important, simply because of the calibration of my senses. I live my life like this, and so because I've always lived my life like this. I have always somehow felt the urge to articulate this relationship between language and the body, because I feel that language comes out of the body, that is very material, that is very, very corporeal. And so it's kind of, I can't avoid thinking about this in my own poems. I can't avoid trying to experiment in my poetry, looking for some ways to relate to the current crisis, yes? But it's more complicated than just kind of like, okay, we have a new theme, so let's now all of us write, poems about. I hope maybe I don't know if I'm making this clear. This difference between this kind of straight, like, okay, this is let's write eco poems, and this more nuanced challenge that we face, yes, because you can't write. I don't know, think about, I've been reading a lot of haiku poems recently. And in traditional Japanese poetry, for instance, the seasonality, yes, the way the seasons come and go. This is like this backdrop that counts as eternity. So if you want to say something that's like absolutely certain, you say, spring comes, flowers bloom, right? So this is like taken for granted. Mm-hmm. But what if we can no longer take this for granted? What if this changes? Yes. What if in Warsaw, the blooming of, let's say, lilac trees comes a month ahead of time, and so the birds that you normally associate with the lilacs, they're kind of late for the lilacs, and so the soundscape doesn't match the what you see and the smells, the rest of the sensuous kind of landscape. Yes. So what happens is a kind of jet lag, which is actually, I think, a great metaphor for our time. I'm borrowing this from a friend of mine, Adam Dickinson. So how do you address? What do we do with this jet lag in our poems? I think it's interesting. I worry, but also I think it's interesting. How do we take this on formally and thematically and in all kinds of ways? So that would be my take on ecopoetics.
I wouldn't say that the poem should or is obliged to respond something, to be an answer for any changes in the world. The poem is to be always forward, to be faster than the changes which are visible around us. But of course, taking care of nature, yes, really important, but not as... I'm a bit skeptic about eco-poetry taken as a as a replacement. I mean that the human being is replaced by the nature. I think that the most important is that to understand that we are part of the nature, that we are within the nature and not over the nature. And that's the most important thing. But there is no productive eco-poetics, in my point of view, without still a human being, perhaps not in the center of the world, but as someone really, really important, because this eco-crisis, it touches also us as human beings, and eco-catastrophe is also something which happens between people and which has an impact on people. So even the language we are using every day, the language of hate, a brutal language, for me, is a part of the global eco crisis. And also that most of people still don't understand what happens in the environment. It's also kind of virus, kind of sickness of our, I don't know, in our mentality, which is also a result of generally taken eco crisis. So for me, if eco-poetics, I don't think that we can manage something using the poem, that we can use the poem to change the world as psychologists or politicians should do. Also, one sentence about the language, eco-poetic language. I have heard in recent years many, let's call them eco-poetic poems, and in 90%, I feel that there is no new language in these poems. They don't use any new language. So for me, a really new eco-poetry language shouldn't use the forms from the past. So if we want to confront using the poem with current problems, we should find a new language to express this problem in the poem. So it shouldn't be so that formally the eco-poetic is a kind of most eco-poetic poems I have heard are linguistically religious poems. Only the God was replaced by the nature. And I think that the changes should be done inside of the language to make the eco-poetry authentic, reliable, and something which I really would need in my daily life.
Right. So if I can just...
Julia, do you have a response?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wanted to reiterate. I write against eco-poetry. I don't like this term eco-poetry. I don't think poetry can change things in the world, like to provide solutions. I agree with you completely when it comes to form. That's what I said. For me, these explorations in new poetics, that's where it gets really interesting. When we think about eco-poetics as a certain area of investigation into human imagination, then these formal investigations are to me a lot more interesting. So I completely agree with you. I fully agree with you with what you said about hatred and how we talk. And I also agree that that's part of ecology, broadly understood. Yeah. That's part of the ecology of this planet. And a very kind of serious part of this of this ecology. So totally, I totally agree with you here. In my own thinking or in my own writing, I avoid saying what a poem should or shouldn't do. just because I think that it's best to just leave it to what it wants to be.
All right. I think we're running short of time. So why don't each of you read one more poem? Tadeusz, you want to go first? If you've only got time for one more, which one would you read, Tadeusz?
Perhaps I'll read a poem from my recent collection,
which is coming out soon, right?
Yeah. The title of the collection of this book is "The Scent of Man," and I would love to read the poem. The title poem. So it's the title is the same, "The Scent of Man." I will read it in Polish, and I will ask you again to be my American voice.
Has this one been published in Polish yet, or is it only coming out in English first?
I'm not sure. I think, perhaps it's the first publication in English. Yes. Sometimes it happens so because in Poland, as we mentioned, there are even less very nice, friendly places when you can put your poetry. And I don't need, when I was 20 years old, it was important to me to publish 100 poems a year and to be visible on, almost all the pages of Polish literary magazines. And now I simply enjoy the moment when I feel that I wrote something important to me. But to share it, it's not such important as in the past. So I don't feel this need to show my new stuff, as soon as possible. So sometimes it really happens that in German or in English my poems have their first publication because my translators are faster than I am as an author. So perhaps this poem hasn't been published in Poland yet. Zapach człowieka. Wsiedli do mojego przedziału, dwie pary w trudnym do określenia wieku. Czuć od nich było wczorajszym i jutrzejszym alkoholem, tanim tytoniem i heroiczną bezradnością. Ta naprzeciwko mnie musiała mieć piękne rysy, zanim przeorał je wieloletni gangbang z etanolem i aldehydem octowym. Każde z osobna jeszcze nie śmierdziało. Dopiero w czwórkę uwalniali odór jednego porządnego menela. Przemknęło mi przez myśl pytanie, jak pachnie ludzkość i czy jej czysta część byłaby w stanie niczym gigantyczna kostka toaletowa przytłumić przykre wyziewy pozostałych. Zamknąć ich rozkład w szczelnej trumnie perfumy. I gdzie między tym wszystkim snuje się mój zapach.
The Scent of Man. They sat in my compartment, two couples of an indefinable age. They smelled of yesterday's and tomorrow's alcohol, cheap tobacco, and heroic helplessness. The woman opposite me must have had lovely features before they were plowed up by a long gangbang with ethanol and acetaldehyde. Each individually did not yet stink. Only as a foursome did they release the odor of one bona fide bum. The question flashed through my mind, what does humankind smell like? And would its clean part be able, like a gigantic bar of toilet soap, to smother the nasty stench of the rest, to shut their decay in an airtight coffin of perfume? And where in the midst of all this does my own smell float? Well, I'm glad you read it in Polish because I didn't know, since Antonia is British, when she said bum, is she, does she mean dupa or does she mean menau? And so it's menau, that it's like a bum lying on the street and not an ass, which also has its own distinctive smell. Interesting, that the title is combined with this cover image, which seems to be very different. This must be one of your children.
Yes. So it's not important for the message, for the author's message that my own kid has been used for this cover. but it was just easy to take this picture of an innocent 3-week-old boy. So that was a huge question, how to show on the cover or how to play with this title, The Scent of Man. And I realized that perhaps a synonym of the smell of humanity is a little kid. And I realized that, and especially this opposition, this confrontation of The Scent of Man, the poem we just read about bumps, and the smell of the little kid, that is a huge entire scale within all our human smells are this scale. So the cover shows perhaps the innocent smell of humanity, and the title poem, The Scent of Man, inside the book shows another smell of humanity, which is nothing ugly, which is also a part of our daily heroism and unheroism.
Julia, would you like to read one last poem?
Sure, with pleasure.
You both write about your children.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. My daughter also appears in the Psalms, especially my daughter appears. But I was thinking about a strange poem, an early poem, maybe surreal poem called After. I just wanted also to say that all of my poems have been translated by Bill Johnston that we're reading in English.
Yes.
So I read in Polish, right?
Okay.
Gładkie morze, jak kawałek szkła w tej dłoni, która rozsypuje piasek pulsujących gwiazd. Albo nie ma dłoni, dziki oddech słońca, czułe ciało ziemi pod stopami tych, co nie widzą gwiazd. Czułe ciało ziemi pod stopami brzus, zamrożone gwiazdy na rzęsach jeziora, gładkie morze jak kawałek lodu na języku tego, kto umiera zimą. Niebo szumnie spada na zimowy las, pomyśl, 7 jeźdźców jak 7 barw tęczy, albo nie ma jeźdźców. Twoja krew pulsuje i nabiera barw. Pomyśl, kropla twojej krwi na śniegu, garść zielonych szkiełek w ciepłej rączce dziecka.
Very beautiful poem. Very beautiful.
Thank you.
And strongly
And you have sea glass in a couple of poems, which who doesn't love sea glass, right? I mean, I live in Hawaii, so we see a lot of sea glass. After. Smooth sea like the sliver of glass in a palm that scatters a sand of throbbing stars. Or no palm. The sun's fierce breath, soft flesh of earth at the feet of those who see no stars. Earth's soft flesh at the feet of birches, icebound stars on a lake's long lashes, smooth sea like an ice cube on the tongue of one who dies in wintertime. The sky clattering down upon a winter's wood. Think, 7 riders like the rainbow's 7 colors. Or no riders, your blood's throbbing, deepening in color. Think, a drop of your blood on the snow. Shards of green glass in a child's small, warm hand. That is a beautiful poem. What was it like working with Bill Johnston?
It's great working with Bill. It's really, he's such an amazingly gifted and careful translator. So I often have this feeling that when he proposes a translation, he always shows me his translations. He always says, "Oh, this is just a draft. I'm showing it to you. Tell me what you think." But these drafts are, always really, really great. And I often feel like they're, maybe more interesting, better than my poems in the original. So I feel very privileged to be working with Bill. We do talk about the translations sometimes, simply because I happen to have access to English also. So, so I can sometimes maybe notice
very
something.
good English.
for professional reasons, right? So sometimes I can see things, and Bill appreciates when I say what I see, like when something is shifted, or when there is maybe some little detail, especially in the Psalms, which are maybe sometimes strange poems, which are already translations in themselves in some sense. So we talk about the translations, and Bill is very open to my suggestions, but I also try to keep it really low and to keep it modest, because I think it's his wonderful work, and I want to respect that.
Tadeusz, how about a few words on working with Antonia, Lloyd-Jones?
We met 20 years ago from Paweł Hile's recommendation. Paweł Hiles was a friend of mine, a very, very good Polish prose writer, novelist who died 3 years ago. And Antonia translated his work. So we met 20 years ago, and Antonia decided to translate my poem, but she didn't expect that I will be sending her 100 questions to every poem, because that is I'm very pedantic, which is kind of illness. And it really makes my life harder. And I felt I need to control every comma. And at the beginning, Antonia was angry and said that she never been since her studies proved that much. She felt like a pupil, like a student, she told me. But after a while, we understood that I do have perhaps pretty good intuition, and some of my questions really, really brought some good corrections, some good changes in the poems. So even Antonia agreed that perhaps that makes sense. So, until now, she takes me a little bit as a obtrusive fly, a little bit with my questions. But sometimes these questions are common answers for these questions make the poems, the translations better. So there is kind of sense in asking, and Antonia doesn't take it as a kind of examination or testing her, ability or professionality as a translator. But she's very busy, and since Olga Tokarczuk got a Nobel Prize, she is almost focused on Tokarczuk's work, which is obvious. So I have always to knock to Antonia's door, twice, 3 times, 4 times a year, asking, could you find 10 minutes a day for your favorite and hated at the same time poet from Poland? And yes, and we are living together. It's not easy. It's not an easy love, but the deepest loves are always complicated.
Very interesting. Because sometimes we hear it from I ask the translators the same question: what's it like working with this author, and what's like working with that author? Are they very intrusive, or do they let you have your own way? So, hearing an author admit that they are very intrusive is an interesting and refreshing thing, I think, and of interest to the translators in our audience. So, Yulia, could you tell me what you're working on next? Maybe say a few words about your novel and things that other things that you have coming up.
When it comes to the things that are already out there or coming up in English. And there's this book which I'm sure people have seen already, because everybody, like, it's been the Penguin Book of Polish Short Stories. So one of my stories is in there, translated by Anna Zaranko, who works with my fiction. So the story is called Moss, and I'm just I can't believe, it gets into this volume with so many great writers. So I'm really super happy about this. Another story is coming up soon in the Kenyon Review, also translated by Anna Zaranko. I think it's coming up in the winter maybe issue of the Kenyon Review, and that one is called I think Our Mother Gravity. I can't remember exactly how the English title goes, but it's another story. Both stories come from my collection, Close Countries, that was published in Poland over a decade ago, so quite old. And then my most recent novel in Polish, which is called in Polish Dom Oriona, The House of Orion in English. So I've got this novel here, the Polish, I'm not sure if you see maybe you see the mirror reflection, I'm not sure what is the image. But anyway, so this is the novel in Polish. It's a novel, it's the second of my novels that have to do with Puszcza Białowieska, right, the Białowieża forest and this eastern part of Poland, Podlasie, close to Belarus. So I mentioned that at the beginning, that's where my family comes from. That's where my family histories are from. But at the same time, Puszcza Białowieska, the Białowieża forest, is this last primeval little bit of primeval forest that once covered the entire European plain. And at the same time, that amazing forest is also the site of this really brutal humanitarian crisis, of brutal politics, of war, of all kinds of complexities. It's really, really a complex, complicated situation right now. So in the House of Orion, which is a strange novel. It's a constellation novel. It's a love story, but also it's a novel about trying to get away from the world. And the person who tries to get away from the world actually ends up, at the heart of all the problems, at the place which is, the Puszcza Białowieska region, at the place where all of our planetary problems come together. So it's a strange book, but Anna Zaranko has translated it into English, and it's being read right now by an editor. A Bulgarian translation of this book is coming out soon.
Tadeusz, what's next? You've got The Scent of Man coming out. Who's the publisher?
It's been published by Aerosmith Press from Boston.
Aerosmith.
Yes.
Very good.
So I will make a little tour with this book next month in the US, but in Poland, I'm going to publish the book with the same title Zapach Człowieka, which should appear early next year in Państwowy Instytut Wydawniczy, PIW, which is my publisher since 6-7 years. And this book is almost ready. So, yeah. So, but it's pretty hard to answer the question what I'm working on currently, because in my case, the poems appear very unexpectedly, and even if I write something, it's the process is very fast, and so. One of the biggest benefits to be a poet is that I feel that the poems are not always, how to say it, that I can't plan, I can't schedule my writing time or even the topic of the poem. But on the other hand, I can't never be sure if next day when I wake up, I will still be a poet. So that's a real fear. So I don't know. I'm pretty sure how the next poetry collection, this Zapach Człowieka, next year will be looking like, but I have no idea who I will be and how my poem will be looking like in the next few years. So sometimes I have heard such critical voices about my poetry that, every of your book is totally different, as if someone else would write them. And I always answer, yes, that's the goal. That's the goal. Even only if every poem I can be surprised, even if from each poem I can learn something new about myself, it's only then there is a sense to keep writing. So I can't answer what will be next year now. I'm focused on my magazine, Topos, which is bi-monthly literary magazine, appearing since over 30 years. But from the beginning of the year, I'm the editor-in-chief, and I prove very, very many changes in this magazine. So the layout will be changed. The authors, I invite new authors. So now I'm focused 10 hours a day on the new, refreshed or on the lifting of this magazine of Topos. So that's my current work, which a little bit disturbs my poetic thinking.
Well, thank you so much for being on the program, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you to both of you.
Hang on. Please subscribe and click the bell to stay on top of the program. Watch the credits for some recommendations about how you can support aid for Ukraine and for Ukrainians fleeing the war in their country. I'd like to thank all the people who helped make this series possible. The Polish Cultural Institute New York sponsors our program. Bartek Remisko, Head of Humanities and Literature at the Polish Cultural Institute New York, is our executive producer. Natalia Iyudin is my fellow producer and editor. Our opening and closing music is by Radek Przedpełski. Thank you all for listening and reading along with us. Let's meet again in a month for another encounter with Polish literature. See you then.
Jest to szary dzień, jak zawsze w tej okolicy. Cała sceneria wydaje się chwilami fotografią z ilustrowanej gazety. Tak szare, tak płaskie są domy, ludzie i pojazdy.